Hello and welcome to this video as a revision guide for an Inspector Calls by JB Priestley. We're going to focus on AO1, the understanding of what the play is about, and AO2, its language, form and structure. Today's video is going to focus on the character of Gerald Croft. Let's begin then by looking at the stage direction to describe him. He's described as an attractive chap, too manly to be dandy, and an easy, well-bred man about town. Priestley makes Gerald appear sophisticated yet social. He looks appealing and seems to be marriage material. He is too manly to be dandy, implying he is a man's man and can stand up for himself. Yet a man about town suggests to us that he's a man of leisure and enjoys the pleasures of life. All of these quotes allow us to accept Gerald as upper class and privileged. Here then are some revision notes based on Gerald. He's a young capitalist, think of Mr. Burling in the making. He underestimates the inspector, at least at first. He is socially superior to Eva Smith and the inspector. He's intolerant, as many of the upper class were, of the lower classes. And he seems pretty remorseless when he finds out the truth. He quickly reverts back to the man he always was. As normal, it's a good idea to study each character and look at whether they are capitalist or socialist. And in this case, Gerald Croft represents capitalism. He appears to be a copy of Arthur, at least at the start of the play, in terms of his attitudes, beliefs, and the way he treats the women around him. He represents the upper class. He pretends to care and look after those less well off, yet does so for selfish reasons. He represents the younger generation who are caught between a world of the past and the future. We are disappointed as he looks like he will change, asking Sheila if he can drink, and seemingly trying to do the best for Eva, but this feeling doesn't last long. He also represents the dying old social order that all but disappeared after the war. The Burlings represent the new power in the 20th century Britain. Gerald, in many respects, then, represents the old rich. The idea of power being passed on because you knew someone who was a sir, rather than actually earning it in your own right. Mr. Burling earns all the power he has, and although he misuses it, at least he is a self-made man, in his words. For a grade 9, we might comment that Gerald's natural intelligence and guile is his flaw. He wants to prove he can outsmart the inspector and so avoids his responsibility. The disappointment we feel towards him turns to anger when he appears to ask Sheila to take back the ring right at the end of the play. His empathy was shallow and, of course, very short-lived. If we look at the text as a biblical text, we might well notice that each of the characters represents a different sin. Gerald represents the sin of lust. He sees Daisy as a sexual object that he can control through his position and wealth. He takes advantage of her social and economic position. He, in short, exploits her. Let's then now look at each of the acts in turn, Act 1, then Act 2 and Act 3, the basic points we can make about the character, and potentially some of the quotes you might want to use in the exam. Act 1. We find out the dinner parties to celebrate Gerald's engagement to Sheila. It is revealed that he disappeared on Sheila in the previous summer and things were initially a little tense between them. Gerald produces a diamond engagement ring, which seems to placate or make Sheila happy. There is talk of how the engagement might benefit the competing companies, Burling and Company and Crofts Limited. Gerald and Arthur are left alone to talk. Arthur brings up the possibility of Gerald's mother disapproving of the engagement, as Gerald's family come from aristocratic stock. Gerald supports Arthur over his reasons for firing Eva Smith. Gerald believes it is fortunate that the inspector can't stop Mr. Burling's efforts to crush his workforce. This implies that Gerald knows what they're doing is wrong. Throughout the act, Gerald regularly stands up and argues against the inspector. He has a strong reaction to the name Daisy Renton, which seems to catch him off guard. Sheila works out from his reaction what Gerald had really been up to the previous year. Some key quotes then from Act 1. "I've told you I was awfully busy at the works at the time. I have an idea that your mother, Lady Croft, appears that you might have done better for yourself socially. Don't blame her. She comes from an old county family, landed people, which means people who own a lot of land and make money from it. I'd like to have a look at that photograph now, Inspector. Getting a bit heavy-handed, aren't you, Inspector?" are two examples of him standing up to the inspector and questioning exactly what he's doing and how he's going about it. Let's look a little bit closer then at one page from Act 1 and think what we can say about it regarding its structure, its language choices, and how the characters interact. The Crofts and the Burlings are no longer competing, but working together for lower costs and higher prices. Hear, hear, and I think my father would agree to that too. Now, Arthur, I don't think you ought to talk about business on an occasion like this. Neither do I, all wrong. Quite so, and I agree with you. I only mentioned it in passing. What I meant to say is this, that Sheila's a lucky girl, and Gerald, I think you're a pretty fortunate young man too. I know I am, just this once anyhow. Burling raising his glass. Oh, so here's wishing the pair of you the very best that life can bring. Gerald and Sheila. All the best. Yes, Gerald. All the best. She's got a nasty temper sometimes, but she's not bad, really. Good old Sheila. Yes, Sheila, darling. Our congratulations and the very best wishes. Thank you. Chump. Can I drink to this, can I? When do I drink? You can drink to me. Gerald doesn't say much in the opening act, but he backs up everything Mr. Burling says. Is this showing respect? Or is this shown because he's talking to his stepfather? Or is it because of personal admiration? Unlike Burling, Gerald isn't so egotistical. He's more aware of social etiquette. He knows that potentially placating or making Sheila feel more at ease would be useful in the future. Once again, Gerald shows his upper-class breeding with his manners. And Sheila hints that she is Gerald's equal and feels able to put Gerald in his place when she needs to. Gerald responds with an equal display of confidence. It's like the two are vying with each other who's going to be the most powerful in the relationship. Let's look a bit at the context of Gerald then, and think why he's behaving the way he does. You can see the part of the play I'm basing this on in the bottom right. Gerald, unlike Arthur, was brought up to know the rules of social situations, a man of charm and sophistication. Arthur is the host, and so, regardless of Gerald's beliefs, he should be agreed with.
For those with money, the period up to the First World War was undoubtedly one of ease, security and comfort. At the top of society, the landed elite, many of them old aristocratic families, who may have been losing their grip on the reins of power, but still retained fabulous wealth. 5 or 6 large houses, enormous estates, 40 or 50 living in servants. Families like the Cavendishes entertained lavishly in London, and at weekends Chatsworth, their country house, was filled with parties of visitors. The landed aristocrats were now joined by the new wealth of industry and commerce, who aped their lifestyle.
As you can see, Gerald comes from a pretty lavish lifestyle. He would have been taught the rules of social etiquette at a very young age, and when he brought up to show respect to his elders. At the end of the video, you heard that the middle classes began to ape the upper classes. That means they used to copy them. So Mr. Burling is deliberately trying to look more like Gerald to impress him and potentially make him more of a useful business partner. Gerald has a them and us attitude to the poor, obviously because he had such a different background to his own, empathising with class divisions of the time. His treatment and attempted interrogation of the inspector at the start of the play suggests how he treats those of a lower position than himself. Gerald and his relationship with the Burlings and Eva Smith is a really complex one. The clip below illustrates the dynamic of this relationship. Burling looks up to Gerald as a man who is where he wants to be, wealthy, head of a large, prosperous company, and respected due to his family's title. However, Gerald looks up to Burling as a self-made man who got to a high position by his own merits, not by peerage or inheritance. His level of respect he shows Mr. Burling near the end of the play implies a deeper respect than just social politeness.
I look down on him because I am upper class. I look up to him because he is upper class. But I look down on him because he is lower class. I am middle class. I know my place. I look up to them both. But I don't look up to him as much as I look up to him. Because he has got innate breeding. I have got innate breeding, but I have not got any money. So sometimes I look up to him. I still look up to him. Because although I have money, I am vulgar. But I am not as vulgar as him. So I still look down on him. I know my place. I look up to them both. But while I am poor, I am industrious, honest and trustworthy. Had I the inclination, I could look down on them. But I don't. We all know our place, but what do we get out of it? I get a feeling of superiority over them. I get a feeling of inferiority from him. But a feeling of superiority over him. I get a pain in the back of my neck.
In many ways, our lack of knowledge about Eva Smith allows her to be placed on a pedestal. She, like the short man in the clip there, is seen as innocent and pure, almost perfect. Her position, and so our position as an audience, allows us to look down on these rich characters and take on a moral high ground and deep empathy with Eva's situation. She was a woman who was only ever trying to do the right thing. As the play develops, Gerald's upper-class persona begins to crack. The audience witness the fragile veneer of a respectful gentleman begin to fall away as Gerald admits his crimes and reflects on the impact of his actions. It is interesting to compare his treatment of Sheila with Eva. He disregards both when something better comes along. As the truth is uncovered, Gerald shows his immaturity as, at first, he tries to deflect his own guilt onto Sheila. His immature attitude is a learnt behaviour where he puts on for others rather than his own true self. He pretends to be more mature than he actually is. Deep down, he's very similar to Eric, but he's learnt how to cover up that and respond in a more adult, mature fashion when he needs to. A summary of Act 2. He tries unsuccessfully to get Sheila to leave and is then questioned by the inspector. It is evident that Gerald planned the affair, as he's already had the keys to his friend's room that he knew would be available for 6 months, the length of time he spent with Eva. Sheila breaks off the engagement upon hearing the details of the affair with Daisy. Upset, Gerald then goes outside for a walk. Let's join Gerald then as he admits his association then with Daisy Renton.
Oh, all right, if you must have it. I met her in March last year at the Stalls Bar at the Palace. I'm the Palace Music Hall here in Bromley.
Well, we didn't think you meant Buckingham Palace.
Oh, thanks. You're going to be a great help, I can see.
Oh, all right, Mr. Croft. The Stalls Bar at the Palace Variety Theatre.
Well, I happened to drop in there one night after rather a dull, tiring day. As the show wasn't very bright, I went down to the bar for a drink. It's a favourite haunt for women of the town. But I didn't propose to stay there long. I can't bear those hard-eyed, dough-faced women. But then I noticed this girl who was completely different. She's very pretty. Soft brown hair and big dark eyes. God.
What's the matter?
No, I'm sorry, I suddenly realized. Taking it in properly. She's dead.
Yes. She's dead. Go on.
She was young and fresh, charming, completely out of place down there. But obviously she wasn't enjoying herself. Old Joe Meggerty, half drunk and goggle-eyed, had wedged her into a corner with that obscene fat carcass.
Surely you don't mean Alderman Meggerty?
But of course I do. He's a notorious womanizer, as well as being one of the worst sots and rogues in Bromley.
That's quite right.
Well, really, Alderman Meggerty. I must say we are learning something tonight.
Go on, please.
Well, the girl saw me looking at her and gave me a glance that could only have been a cry for help. So, I went across to Meggerty and made up some nonsense about the manager having a message for him or something like that and got him out of the way. And then I told the girl that if she didn't want anything more like that sort of thing, she must let me take her out of there. Well, she agreed at once.
Where did you go?
We went along to the county hotel, which I knew would be quiet at that time of night. We had a drink or two, talked.
She talked about herself?
Yeah. She told me her name was Daisy Renton, that she'd lost both her parents, and that she came from somewhere outside Bromley. I couldn't get any exact details out of her about her past life, but what she did let slip, although she didn't mean to, was that she was penniless. And at that moment, actually hungry. So I made the people of the county find some food for her.
And then you decided to keep her as your mistress?
What?
Of course, Mother. It was obvious from the start. Go on, Gerald. Don't mind Mother.
Well, I discovered, not that night, but 2 nights later when we met again, not by accident that time, of course, that she was desperately hard up and about to be evicted from the miserable back room she had. So it happened that a friend of mine had let me have a key to a nice set of rooms he had in Morgan Terrace and asked me to keep an eye on them and use them if I wanted. So I insisted on Daisy moving into those rooms, and I made her take some money to keep her going. I want you to understand that I didn't install her there to make love to her. I'm sorry for her, and I couldn't stand the idea of her going back to the Palace Bar. I asked for nothing in return.
Nevertheless, she became your mistress.
Yes. It was inevitable, I suppose. She was young, pretty, warm-hearted, and intensely grateful. I immediately became the most important thing in her life. You understand?
Oh, yes, yes. She was a woman. She was lonely. Were you in love with her?
Just what I was going to ask.
I really must protest.
Now, why should you do any protesting? It was you who turned the girl out in the first place.
Were you in love with her, Gerald?
It's hard to say. I didn't feel about her as she felt about me.
Of course not. You were the wonderful fairy prince. You must have adored it, Gerald.
I don't think we need to hear further details of this disgusting affair.
I do. And anyhow, we haven't had any details yet.
And you're not going to have any. It wasn't disgusting, you know.
It's disgusting to me.
When did this affair end?
Early in September last year, I had to go away on business then for a few weeks. By that time, Daisy knew it was coming to an end. So I broke it off definitely before I went.
How did she take it?
Much better than I'd hoped. She was very gallant about it.
That was nice for you.
No, it wasn't. She told me that she'd been happier than she'd ever been before, but that she knew that it couldn't last. She hadn't expected it to last. She didn't blame me at all. Wish to God she had now, and I feel better about it.
She had to move out of those rooms?
Yes. We'd agreed about that. She'd managed to save some money during the summer. She'd lived very economically on what I'd allowed her, and she wouldn't take any more from me. But I insisted on her taking as a parting gift enough money, although it wasn't so very much, to keep her going to the end of the year.
Did she tell you what she proposed to do after you left her?
No. She wouldn't talk about that. I gathered from one or two things that she said that she'd thought of leaving Brumley, but whether she did or not, I don't know. Did she?
Yes, she went away for about 2 months to some seaside place.
By herself?
Yes. I think she went away to be alone, to be quiet, and remember all that had happened between them.
How do you know that?
Well, she kept a rough sort of diary, and in there she said that she wanted to be alone, to be quiet, to remember, just to make it last longer. She felt that nothing could be so good for her again, so she had to make it last longer.
I see. Well, I never saw her again. That's all I can tell you.
That's all I want to know from you.
Well, in that case, as I'm rather more upset by this business than I probably appear, I'd like to be alone for a while. I would be very grateful if you'd let me go.
Go where? Home?
No, I'd just go outside and walk for a while. I'll come back.
Key quotes then from Act 2. I think Miss Burling ought to be excused of any more questioning. I'm rather more upset by this business than I probably appear, and, well, I'd like to be alone for a while. I'd be glad if he'd let me go. He goes out, they watch him go in silence. We hear the front door slam. A grade 9 might comment that based on his attitude so far, it's unlikely he's actually really upset by what he's just heard, but he knows he won't be able to hide his feelings from the inspector or Sheila. We know from reading the play that he goes straight to the local police station, but tells everybody he met a sergeant on the corner. This is unlikely, as sergeants don't tend to just wander the streets late at night. He would have had to go out of his way to find the sergeant and interrogate what he knew about Inspector Gould. The sentence structure here, I'm rather more upset by this business, probably appeared to be, might be suggested to be fabricated. He's pretending, giving an excuse to leave, so he can then investigate the inspector himself. Some words that he uses then to describe Eva Smith. She was very pretty, soft brown hair and big dark eyes. If she didn't want any more of that sort of thing, she'd better let me take her out of there. She was desperately hard up. Gave me a glance that was nothing less than a cry for help. She told me she had a job in one of the works. I insisted on Daisy moving into those rooms. I didn't install her there that I could make love to her. I didn't ask for anything in return. I suppose it was inevitable. I became at once the most important person in her life. I didn't feel about her as she felt about me. Please take the time to pause this video and brainstorm perhaps some of the things you might say about one or two of these quotes. What do they tell you about Gerald? What does the sentence structure tell you? Is there any key words that you notice he uses that you can explain in a bit more depth? Let's look closer at one of the pages from Act 2. Gerald, with an effort, crossing from right and then centre below the table. Inspector, I think Miss Burling ought to be excused for any more of this questioning. She's told you all she knows. She had a long, exciting and tiring day. We are celebrating our engagement, you know. And now she's obviously had about as much of this as she can stand. You heard her. He means I'm getting hysterical now. And are you? Probably. Well, I don't want to keep you here. I've no more questions to ask you. No, but you haven't finished asking questions, have you? No. You see? I'm staying. Why should you? It's bound to be unpleasant and disturbing. And you think women ought to be protected from unpleasant things? If possible, yes. We all know one new woman who wasn't, don't we? Suppose I asked for that. Gerald knows that what is coming. The effort in moving across the room shows this, and pretends to be a gentleman. His tone becomes formal and cold, much more representative perhaps of Mrs. Burling. The emotive language here, disturbing, implies that Gerald has already begun to feel guilty, or is he exaggerating a way of manipulating Sheila out of the room? Both words foreshadow how Sheila feels by the end of the play. Gerald succumbs to the lower-class inspector much as he did to Sheila earlier in the play. If pressure is placed upon him, he seems to falter and crack each time. A different part of Act 2? I didn't intend to stay there long. I hated those hard-eyed, dough-faced women. And then I noticed a girl who looked quite different. She was very pretty, soft brown hair and big dark eyes. What's the matter? Sorry, I've suddenly realised, taken in properly, that she's dead. Yes, she's dead. Go on. The girl was charmingly dressed too, in a simple, inexpensive sort of way, and altogether she looked young and fresh and charming, and, what shall I say, the opposite of hard and tough, able to look after herself. She was quite out of place down there, and obviously she wasn't enjoying herself. Old Joe Meggerty, half-drunk and goggle-eyed, had wedged her into a corner with that obscene fat carcass of his. There's no need to be disgusting. And surely you don't mean Alderman Meggerty? Of course I do. He's a notorious womanizer, and one of the worst sots and rogues in Bromley. Gerald describes prostitutes here, giving us a glimpse at the dark underside of the upper classes. Or he could be referencing the fact that he sees everyone as acting a role and growing weary of the charade the world puts on. Eva is once again described for her looks first, further objectifying her. The breaks in speech here indicates when Gerald's cold tone and formality break as he realises just what he's done. His language here is fractured and broken, implying his inner struggles with what he did and what it meant. This also allows us to fully see how immature he is. This is why the inspector responds so harshly, as if he's reprimanding a small boy. This builds on the description earlier. He sees Eva as an alien to his world, as if she's completely out of place in his society, too pure and innocent to be there. Yet his response is one of a predator and prey. The inclusion here of Meggerty allows us to see the corruption of the lower classes wasn't just confined to Gerald. Much of the upper classes preyed on the weaknesses of the poor. An alderman is a man who works for the courts and the council. So Joe Meggerty was a man of quite high social standing, and this is him in his free time, able to do what he chooses. The writer's purpose. Gerald represents the selfish and the ego-driven attitude of the upper class. He has a key role in Eva's death. He seemingly manipulated her affections and built her up to be at her happiest, knowing it would abruptly be over. He held power over her. He lets the audience down as he looks as if he will change by the end of the play. He has the ability and compassion to do so, and is intelligent to realise what is right and what's wrong. But his arrogance and education gets in the way of his ideals. In summary, Gerald is responsible for the suicide because he gave her hope and allowed her to believe in false promise that life could be better. He gave her a home, food and money, but cruelly took it away. His self-interest and self-entitlement mean he was bored of her and went back to the plainer but wealthier Sheila. To get a grade 9, we really need to interrogate with how much of what we see from Gerald in this act, and whether it's real or not. Gerald is used to manipulating others and putting on a front as part of his life as an upper-class gentleman. We've already seen he attempts to cover his immaturity with multiple affairs. We have no reason at all to trust him. Gerald repeatedly tries to deflect the inspector away from himself and onto Eric. For example, he mentions that Eric does drink pretty hard, as a way of protecting himself. He repeatedly uses sophistry, a way of using parts of the truth to create a believable lie. An example might be where he claims he didn't know Eva, but did know Daisy, which seems really unlikely. Now you want to see someone else put through it, Gerald says to Sheila. He projects his own manipulative personality onto Sheila. He makes her sound as if she's just doing it as some kind of cruel revenge, thereby putting Sheila on the back burner and making her more defensive and less than likely to listen to exactly what happened. Simplistically, we see through Gerald saving Eva and know he's really after sex, but his real emotions or motivations could be much more sinister. Gerald's description of Eva as young, fresh and charming all represent qualities he can take from her. To Gerald, it's a bit like plucking a flower, linking back to, of course, Daisy's name. Act 3. Gerald finally returns from his walk outside once the inspector's left. Gerald has news. He met a police sergeant on his walk, and it seems the inspector was not a real police officer. Gerald then grows in confidence and questions whether Eva is even dead or real. Gerald makes the point that none of them saw the same photograph at the same time. Finally, it is Gerald who rings the infirmary to check whether a suicide had been brought in. It hadn't. It could therefore be argued that it is Gerald who creates a situation on which all their behaviour can now be excused. It is interesting that Gerald remains focused on what can be proved, conveniently overlooking his own affair for the fact they all treat a woman, or women, in the way they've admitted. Key quotes from Act 3. I met a police sergeant I know down the road. There isn't any such inspector we've been had. We've no proof it was the same photograph. Everything's all right now. And how do we know any girl killed herself today? Let's join Gerald then as he tries to make sense of what he's just been through.
Well, all right, you all admit it's something to do with a girl, but how do we know it's the same girl? Look here, Mr. Burlington. Now, you sacked a girl called Eva Smith. Now, you've forgotten, but then he shows you a photograph of her. And then you remember, right? Well, that bit's straightforward enough, but what then? Well, then he happens to know that Sheila had a girl sacked from Millward's shop. He tells us that it's this same Eva Smith, and he shows her a photograph that she recognises.
Yes, the same photograph.
How do we know it's the same photograph? Did you see the one he showed your father?
Oh, no, I didn't.
And did your father see the one he showed you?
No, he didn't, and I see what you mean now.
We've no real evidence it was the same photograph, and therefore no evidence it was the same girl. Well, now take me. Oh, he didn't show me a photograph. Remember? Caught me out by announcing that the girl had changed her name to Daisy Renton, and I gave myself away once because I'd known of Daisy Renton. And we haven't the slightest proof that Daisy Renton was really Eva Smith. We've only his word for it. He could have been bluffing all the time. Of course he could. He probably was. Well, now, what happened after I left?
Well, I was upset because Eric had left the house. And this man said that if Eric didn't come back, he'd have to go and find him. Well, that made me feel worse still. And then, quite suddenly, he said I had seen Eva Smith only 2 weeks ago.
Now, those were his exact words.
Like a fool, I said yes, I had.
Now, she didn't call herself Eva Smith when she came to see you at the committee, did she?
No, of course not. But when he suddenly turned on me with all those questions, well, I answered more or less as he wanted me to.
But, Mother, don't forget that he showed you a photograph of the girl before that, and you obviously recognised it.
Well, did anybody else see the photograph?
No, he showed it only to me.
I mean, don't you see? We've still no evidence it was the same girl. He could have shown you a photograph of any girl who applied to the committee. And how do we know she was Eva Smith or Daisy Renton?
Gerald's dead bat. He could have been showing us a different photograph each time and we'd have been none the wiser. We can all have been recognising different girls.
Exactly. Did he ask you to identify a photograph, Eric?
No, he didn't need a photograph by the time he got round to me. But it must have been the same girl I knew that went round to see Mother.
Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Now, that meeting of your mother's could have been just as much a put-up job as all this police inspector business. He could have been bluffing all the time.
How could he? The girl's dead, isn't she?
What girl? There were probably 4 or 5 different girls.
That doesn't matter to me. The one that I knew is dead.
Is she? How do we know she is?
Oh, that's right. Now you've hit it. How do we know any girl killed herself today?
Let's take her.
You can see Gerald there getting more and more excited as he's proven to be correct. Gerald crossing to Eric. All right, you all admitted something to do with a girl, but how do you know it's the same girl? He looks around triumphantly at them. As they puzzle this out, he turns to Burling. After pause, crosses to him. Look here, Mr. Burling. You sack a girl called Eva Smith. You've forgotten, but he shows you a photograph of her and you remember, right? The stage direction here suggests Gerald is showing power over those that are most similar to him. In this case, Eric. Once again, Gerald is trying to move blame away from himself. You all admitted, as if he's now blameless. His triumph here seems shallow. Who's he triumphed over? He is overly dramatic here as a show of his intelligence and skill. Gerald's tone here is excited and jubilant as he exaggerates his immaturity and makes us dislike him even more. He uses the same tone as the inspector and appears to have forgotten his initial show of respect. He appears to think he's morally and intellectually superior to everyone else in the room. Audience reactions then, 1945, which is when the play was first shown. What would they think of Gerald? Priestley goes out of his way to make us distrust Gerald on many levels, and the audience at the time might well think the same. It is probably Gerald who signals the arrival of the new inspector, with his attempt to give back the ring and hold up the ring, which Sheila appears to accept, given perhaps more time. Priestley would hope that by now his audience be thinking as a socialist and would now dislike Gerald because it is Gerald's fault all the characters reject the inspector's message. It is because of one seeming lie that he uncovers that all the others begin to question what happened to them. Some key ideas then for Gerald, as well as some sentence starters and the explanations for the quotes. By the start of the play, Gerald is presented as a man of class, wealth and distinction. His family are aristocratic, which appeals to Mr. Burling. And 3 quotes there from Act 1, and 3 explanations to around about grade 5 standard. As the play develops, Gerald reveals the full extent of his relationship with Daisy. On the surface, he seems to have treated her kindly. Another interpretation that he used her in quite a calculating way, and it was cruel to give her happiness, only then to take it away. By the end of the play, it is Gerald who plays a pivotal role. 2 Burlings believe the inspector and 2 do not. It is only when Gerald sides against the inspector that the phone rings and the news of the real death arrives. Now we move on to our exam essay guidance. Remember, this is a morality play. It is trying to teach us the message of socialism. Once more, I remind you that none of the characters are real. They are constructs built to represent different parts of society. Gerald is constructed to look like a member of the aristocracy. In the exam, they'll give you 1 page to work with for the exam question. You will need to think about all of the play as a full sort of narrative, but the exam board will give you 1 page to study in detail to help you out. As normal, when looking at 1 page or 1 extract from the play or book, it's useful to consider the word choices the writer has used, the sentence types that are being deployed, the tone of voice, how characters respond to each other, and where in the play it comes from. And in this case, we're also going to consider whether the characters are acting in a way you would expect. Here is then an audio version of the page we're going to look at.
Right? We can settle that at once.
How?
By ringing up the infirmary. Either there's a dead girl there, or there isn't. Hello? The infirmary, please.
It will look a bit odd, won't it? Ringing up at this time of night.
Is that the infirmary? Yeah, this is Mr. Gerald Croft of Crofts Limited. Yes. We're rather worried about one of our employees. Have you had a girl brought in this afternoon who committed suicide by drinking disinfectant? Or any other suicide? Yes, I'll wait. Yes? You're certain of that? I see. Well, thank you very much. Good night.
Well?
No girl has died in there today, and they haven't had a suicide for months.
As we study this extract, please take a look at the marking criteria on the left and the right, as we're looking at how this extract fits in and understanding what this extract tells us about the character, and obviously on the right hand side how it uses language to create those effects. The best answers won't just comment on what you can tell from what he says, but also how Gerald has changed or adapted or evolved to get to this point in the play. This then is part of the end of the play, so we use the phrase by the conclusion. I link to the reader or the audience by saying we, so I'm clearly telling the exam board that I'm about to say how I feel about the character. By the conclusion, we can clearly see that Gerald is immature and convinced he's in the right. It is likely that Inspector's second call is because of his passionate denial of his guilt in the face of the lies. His tone here is more confident, as he is speaking in statements to show his command of the situation. In many ways, you could say he is now a true capitalist rather than just acting as one. You can see the parts in red on the right-hand side are evidence that I understand the whole play, not just this page, as I've said how the character has changed or developed. Something that's really important when writing a full essay answer. Now let's look at a whole essay. How is Gerald presented in the play Inspector Calls? The exam board will give you 2 bullet points to help you. Refer to the extract and play as a whole, and show your understanding of the characters and the play as a whole. First, I start with an introduction paragraph, saying what I know about Gerald from the whole play. This is where I incorporate my information about what the character represents. I might also give some indication of his personality, in this case in sentence 2, where I've said he is arrogant and looks down on those below him. Look at how it is a very short introduction, no more than 2 or 3 lines at most, giving an overview of the character. I then move into the start of the play, and the example you can see here is a grade 4 paragraph. It's got multiple quotes used that are highlighted in red, and I've zoomed in or analysed one particular word, heavy-handed, and named the device being used, in this case heavy-handed using alliteration. I've looked at his sentence structure and his tone of voice, and then I've ended the paragraph with a link to the audience. What would we think as we watch Gerald at the start of the play? The explanations here are quite short, so it'd be difficult to go above a level 4 in this paragraph unless I added more detail about why certain words are being used and what the character is thinking as he says certain lines. As I now reveal the middle of my essay, you'll notice immediately it's longer and I've explained a lot more detail. I've given a lot more depth of understanding in this paragraph, and so it more or less doubles in length. This would be a grade 7 or 8 paragraph. I start then by saying by the middle of the play, showing how Gerald has changed since the start. I make a point. Gerald has realised what he's done and is a lot less sure of himself. I then explain that point. When admitting that what he's done wrong, he becomes a lot more hesitant and reflective, suggesting to us, the reader, that he's lost command of the situation. I then explain once more why that's important. This would have been new ground for Gerald, as he's used to controlling and manipulating others, as if he's been caught out by the inspector. When telling us, again linking to the reader, about his encounter with Daisy, so-called because of her commonness and prettiness, he repeatedly shows he controlled her. Notice in blue I put the device he seems to be using. I insisted, I made her, I want you to understand. All three of these phrases suggest the same thing. They suggest to us that he seeks to command others who are lower than he is, as if he sees them not as people but more as servants. Notice I explain my answer using the phrase as if. Okay, I could easily use the word because as well to make it easier for the exam board to show, easier for me to prove to the exam board I'm explaining my points. He goes on to show his ego and perhaps the real Gerald. I became at once the most important person in her life, you understand. Which is important as it shows his motivation for exploiting Eva for self-gain and self-promotion. The harsh phrase, you understand, is brutal and rude, but also shows he's desperate to be understood and appreciated. That's where I've zoomed in and analysed the quote, in this case looking at you understand, but also looking at the tone that would be used for that particular part of the quote. Gerald is a caring man, but is stuck by the rules in which the rich say he should behave. Throughout the middle of the play, he's pausing and reflecting on what he's doing, realises how nasty he actually was, and this has taken her death to realise this. The tone of voice here shows his desperation for others to be sympathetic to him and know why he did what he did. As an audience, we can appreciate that Gerald was trying to do the right thing, yet his own arrogance and ego stopped him behaving a better way to someone of a class much lower than him. I always end my paragraphs with a link back to the audience and the questions set, making sure the examiner fully realises that I'm trying to evaluate the evidence I'm given and come up with a conclusion. You'll also notice repeatedly in this answer I'm being sensitive to exactly why Gerald is behaving the way he is. That's really important to get the highest grades. And now my last paragraph. This would be an example of a grade 2. By the end of the play, we see Gerald is happy. The quote, "There isn't any such inspector we've been had," tells me this. He thinks he's better than everyone else, as the inspector isn't real. A simple point, evidence, and explain paragraph. No real explanation given, just a short one-liner that tells the examiner that I have a basic understanding of the character. The character is happy by the end of the play. Try to avoid, obviously, this level of detail. Really, to prove you're good at English and understand a play that now you've been studying in lessons as well as through these clips, it's really important you give as much detail as you can using the information that you've learnt. Thank you very much then for listening to this audio guide to revise the character of Gerald Croft, part of your GCSE post-1914 drama.